The Final Fantasy franchise and its main games are known for sharing many features between them that could make anyone go, oh, this is a Final Fantasy game. These things can be the job systems that characters can have for gameplay reasons, or abilities like the name of the magic spells with Flare, Ultima and the ARA or AGA ones. One concept that may be found in many types of media or series, not only for this one, is the idea of time skips or some sort of big flashback in the middle of the main events of the game to visit a different period of the story, where you'll be able to have a different point of view of the same or different cast of characters and have a better context of the big picture. With Final Fantasy XVI coming up in less than 4 weeks, in the very first trailer that it was shown, we got glimpses of what it seems to be the main character in different phases of his life, something it was more evident with the last shot. As we approach the release and have way more information, we confirm this by learning that we'll control Clive through different times of his life, probably even multiple ones. That's why we are going to visit each game of the franchise to see if this type of event has happened at some point of the story and how they handle it, as a countdown and anticipation of 16's release. While the focus is to show an explicit time skip or big playable flashback in previous Final Fantasy games, we are also going to highlight some other details, like when some specific character has a completely different render and model because they are shown in different times, playable or not. And of course, some of these games have sequels, so while they don't count as the focus is to have these time jumps in the same game, they are worth mentioning just to see the different changes the characters go through, physically or their role in the world. So don't mind me having tangents like those. Before starting, be mindful of spoilers in each section, and any type of support in the form of subs or likes, etc. I will deeply appreciate. When you think about the compelling or more focused story in a Final Fantasy game, you probably start thinking from Final Fantasy IV onwards, maybe even FF2, as the original one was more about the sense of an epic adventure with the story behind it act more as a background for the world setting. But that doesn't mean that we can't look at these little details and dialogues and mention their approach about this topic, for homage reasons to the original too. The time shenanigans that I am referring to, it has to deal with the very start and the last portion of the game, as things come full circle. Because while the first mission the Warriors of Light have is to chase and defeat Garland at the Chaos Shrine to save Princess Sarah, at the end of the game this shrine is used as the portal to 2000 years in the past, a point in time when the temple was intact, as Garland was sent here by the Four Fiends after being defeated at the start, proceeding to create a time loop. In Sakaguchi's words, Garland, who was defeated at the beginning of the story, reincarnated as Chaos 2000 years ago, continued his reign of darkness and then became a warrior of light again, and so on in an infinite loop. Of course, being this a straight up time travel, and Famicom or NES games, you don't expect to see characters' model changing from what you have during most of the game, minus the job upgrades. But it's a cute mention to go back to the game that started it all, and how it plays with the idea of events in different times and eras. Now we focus more on the idea of a specific character going through a notorious change in time during the same main story game, although with a twist. Final Fantasy IV will introduce the character Rydia, a child from the village of Mist, who suffered the destruction of her town and death of her mother. She is part of a tribe of summoners and will join Cecil as he tries to amend his mistakes and search for redemption. But the specific event that happens with her is that after the party sails through the seas on a ship, they are attacked by Leviathan and Cecil is left stranded alone, continuing with his journey. After some time, and during a confrontation against Golbesk himself, Rydia appears to save us with her summons, but she's looking different, as the little girl from the village of Mist now have become a young woman. This is because after the Leviathan attack, she ended up in the Summon World, home of the Sea Serpent himself, in where time flows at a different pace, allowing her to grow, train and learn about her summoner legacy. So this is a case in which, while the main events of the game flows during the same time in a straight line, It's one character in specific that goes through her own time skip, having a different game sprite, age, job, abilities, outfit, and being more mature and everything that comes with growing up. Of course, there's also the fact that this game was one of the first to get an actual sequel on its story. So during Final Fantasy IV The After Years, we are able to see our beloved cast in their new roles and styles. While this is a new story involving Cecil's and Rosa's son, we can see the growth and changes of the characters we've met during the first game back then, such as Cain, Edge, the twins Palom and Porom, Young or Sid. Final Fantasy V had a couple of flashbacks, but none of them were playable and the main beat happened during the same stretch, so we jump ahead to Final Fantasy VI, in where the main plot has two big moments in time. The first half, you follow mostly the Returners and their attempts to stop an empire that keeps doing empire things, led by Gestahl and a significant role of Kefka. Things get a little bit hectic when the powers of the Espers and Warring Triad are involved, with Kefka getting the upper hand and turning the world into a world of ruin, or its many other names, splitting our party and being the Emperor for a whole year, as Sid explains to Celes once we are once again in control of the character. So, while there's a time skip of a year right after Kefka got the power of the gods of magic and conquered the world, there's barely any changes in the character's sprite, as it's only past 1 year, which makes sense. The changes are mostly to the world itself, as it's considered the time where the world ended, with many plants refusing to grow, or with many magic-infused monsters roaming the wastelands, and things like that. Although, there is one small playable section in this game that doesn't take place in these two main events, and it is a flashback to discover Terra's origins. When she is struggling with her mysterious powers, we can learn about the time a human entered the Esper world, and we control the character Maduin who finds her and play through the events of that time, that end up with Terra's birth out of these two characters and the invasion of the Empire to the world. We don't get to fight with him, but it's playable for a small moment before getting him as a summon later in the game. As you may know, the world of Final Fantasy VII has been expanded through the compilation and its different products, through different points in time, but before highlighting that, let's take a look at the main plot of the original FF7. From start to finish, the game doesn't take that long in time, as probably around a month, since the first bombing until the meteor almost crashing down, so there's no time skips in that game. But we have the first playable flashback with actual fights in this game, and this is during the first telling of arguably the most important event in Final Fantasy VII lore, the Nibelheim Incident flashback. When Cloud tells his version of the story at Calm, the game starts with a conversation between Cloud and Sephiroth and a fight against a dragon on the road, where we have control of the novice soldier 16-year-old Cloud, fairly weaker than his current time version, as it's level 1 with low stats and doomed to die in the fight, unless Sephiroth, who fights beside you and is far from your level, kills the dragon before it. You then are able to play through all the event, mainly for the story bit, but also during the expedition through Mount Nibel, you'll find random encounters that Sephiroth will probably smack for you instead, as little Cloud, as excited as he may be to be part of this mission, is younger and weaker for this job. And what we care about for the sake of this video, it has a very subtle change in his appearance, in the form of his portrait, where his younger self is more chubby and less sharp in the facial expression. It's also something to look forward to in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, as in theory it should start the game during this flashback, so pay attention if Cloud's model, with modern graphics, look closer to his chubby Crisis Core version, or they use the same one like apparently did during his memory of talking to his mom in Remake. Very important details to look forward to, I know. And of course, as the compilation of FF7 deals with many events through the years, such as Crisis Core and Before Crisis in the past, or Advent Children and Dirge of Cerberus in the future, we have different models and changes of the characters, such as Cloud himself, Tifa, Aerith, Yuffie, etc. Final Fantasy VIII has certainly a history when it's about things happening in different times, with the participation of a main antagonist doing some time shenanigans here and there, and in particular it takes the element of time skip or flashback with some small twist. As it happened, it's playable, but it's not the same protagonist or important character in different time, but rather you have a playable section of events that happened in the past but controlling other completely different characters than your main party in the present. This is because during some moments in the game, Squall and his besties will suddenly feel tired and fall asleep, and during that dream in which they are suspiciously aware, you control the characters Laguna, Ward and Kyros, a trio of Galbadian soldiers participating in the effort to invade Timber, and tagging along their time together that often includes Laguna's clumsy nature taking the main spot of it, which Squall is delighted to experience. While this is first treated as the dream world, in actuality it is later revealed that the dreams are a form of time travel in which the character alone sends the present party to experience events of Laguna's past, and change it if possible. So there's not only a back and forth between present time and past, but it also changes the characters you are able to play as, in this game's version of time skips. Later in the game, you are able to finally meet this dream trio in the present, as Laguna is the president of Estar for the last 70 years. Oh, and Squall's father. This topic in Final Fantasy X is mostly a special mention, because this was the first Final Fantasy game to have a sequel, so you expect different times and characters models. But those don't happen in the same game, as the original one happens mainly during the Summoner's Pilgrimage, following Yuna to save the world of Sin and finding a way to save her too in the process. There's some highlights here and there, like starting the game in Tidus' home, Samarkand, which is revealed that it was a city that existed 1000 years ago before being invaded, but preserved in a dream by the Faith. And the character model you may be able to see the change, it's Auron, as he took part of the pilgrimage of Yuna's father 10 years ago. Now, the sequel Final Fantasy X-2 happens 2 years after the end of 10, so you expect to see some changes in the main characters like Yuna and Riku. In their main looks, but thanks to the amazing dress spheres, you have them in different outfits. But at the same time, you have characters like Waka and Lulu to look the same, even when she's pregnant, which is kinda funny. The other different designs that the main characters Tidus and Yuna have are sketches for the novel that happened after X-2, the one I love to call Nojima's revenge for making him bring Tidus back in X-2, which eventually left Square, but that's a personal headcanon of mine. For a better and more understanding lore video, you should check out this amazing one by Final Fantasy Union. Final Fantasy XII starts right off with some good old tragedy. What seemed to be a peaceful wedding day transitioned into an invasion and the death of the Prince of the Kingdom, and your gameplay tutorial prologue starts, controlling the character Reks, a young soldier following the commands of Basch, a more mature warrior, in the middle of this invasion. After the introduction to the mechanics of the game and dealing with some fights, including some small boss fight that showcases Bash's hidden power that will eventually be the quickening or the limit break of the game, you see one final cutscene and twist, before coming to the conclusion of the invasion with Reks fainting getting stabbed. After that, it jumps to 2 years later, where the rest of the game is going to take place, taking control of Reks' younger brother, Van, and moving on with the story from that point forward, meeting every other party member including Basch himself, who will be able to reveal what actually happened that day. So, besides Reks' fatal fate, you could say the prologue of the game acts as a flashback 2 years in the past, and with a different playable character, so there's no change in characters' models, as Basch was already older enough to look the same, except for the treatment that he got that made him more hairy and all. The Final Fantasy XIII Trilogy has a similar situation to 10. As it's a game with multiple sequels, you may expect some time jumps in between, as the original installment happened in the same stretch of time, with some flashback to the previous 13 days to the start of the game, or the mention of Vanille and Fang being from 100 years ago in a similar fashion to Tidus. Although it's during Final Fantasy XIII too when things get chaotic about time jumps, as the protagonist of that game, Terra and Noel, will literally jump through times themselves, visiting different times and eras. So this is technically cheating, but it's a first for a Final Fantasy game to get into this constant time travel, rather than for the final dungeon alone, like in FF1 or something like time compression in FF8. Something we can highlight from this whole adventure is that in this time lapse that technically happened through more than 1000 years, with 500 of them frozen in time, we got updated models of Snow, mainly for outfit reasons, but his Lightning Returns version is worth it alone. And the actual growth of Hope Estheim, as he was a 14-year-old kid during FF13, but you're able to visit him in one of the many futures with Terra, where he is a young adult of 24 or 27, when he joins the adventure of time traveling, staying like that before he got kidnapped by literally God, and regressing to his young self. So, we have some updates and character growth here and there in the middle of this 1000-year-long adventure. As an MMO, Final Fantasy XIV will be a game that constantly receives updates and story expansions, so eventually you have to expect the story to be moving forward in time by definition. But in particular the biggest clear skip, also because of development reasons, it'd be the relaunch of A Realm Reborn, proceeding 5 years after the now discontinued 1.0 version, which storylines have concluded are no longer accessible. So instead of dwelling into a territory I'm not familiar with, as the events between A Realm Reborn and Endwalker could easily happen during a 2-year gap through the many major story arcs, a better thing would be to check out the glow-up of some of the main characters. I mean, look at the Y'shtola from A Realm Reborn, going to a full-on Black Mage mode in Shadowbringer. And some other noticeable growth, like Thancred from his 1.0 version until his Shadowbringer and eventually Endwalker one, and the twins Alphinaud and Alizai go through some sort of change too, by comparing their initial and current designs. Or even the changes that Cid Garland goes through, from Birthless 1.0 to the current one, whose story was briefly mentioned in my previous video about the Cids of Final Fantasy. But basically, as the main time skip happened after the 1.0 version, and then we have constant updates and time progression, rather than time skips or jumps, we are able to see the changes that characters go through in this adventure. Final Fantasy XV is probably the main representative of this topic in the franchise, and it's probably the easier to compare with what Final Fantasy XVI is showing so far, as it has a very defined moment in the story inside the main game itself, where the time skip happens and it's for 10 years. And in a more traditional sense, this is a normal passage of time, so 10 years after being sealed, the protagonist of this game, Noctis Caelum, returns with a brand new look, and by that I mean a fancy beard. Off to reunite with his best friends who tagged along for the whole journey and were waiting for him, ready to get their best trip and go back to Insomnia to finish things off. But yes, the most important thing here is the outfit as always. The other fun part about this case is that technically speaking, while you spend most chapters playing as 20-year-old Noctis and friends before this time skip, when you immediately start the game, you are already at Insomnia attempting to take on Ifrit with 30-year-old Noctis. The gang is introduced and then right after, it goes back to the beginning of the journey. So it also could be taken as a flashback instead of a jump forward, which is something to mention later in 16. The bonus non-mainline game for this case will be the starting chapter of Final Fantasy Tactics, which I feel at this point is impossible not to compare it to Final Fantasy XVI. And for this particular topic, it's also about big flashbacks that serves as the first bits of the game to later go and jump ahead to present time, where the rest of the game develops. This is because while the prologue fight of this game that serves as a tutorial happens during the starting event, after it finishes, the protagonist Ramza witnesses how a mysterious person kidnapped the princess, and when he is able to recognize him, realizes that it was his childhood friend Delita, working for the antagonistic group. This connection is what makes Ramza have a couple of questions and a big flashback to those past events, where you are able to play through many battles in that chapter, exploring the friend's early days. That flashback ends when you reach the big tragedy of the game, where Delita's sister is killed by the very same people who were supposed to save her, and not only that, but the boys also end up in the middle of the bombing of the place to take down part of the death corpse. This event of course will change both Delita and Ramza's lives from that point forward, and will show some cool Ramza dialogue moment. After that, we go back to the present and the game moves on, having a different trip of course. That's the detail that matters the most after all. There is a reason these last cases with Final Fantasy Tactics and 15 were so relevant to what is shown in Final Fantasy XVI footage so far. It's because, besides being a clear and defined change between the main protagonist Clive younger and older looks, since day one of the first trailer even, with the new information as we get closer to the release of the game, we know that the main part of the story happens with the look that older Clive has, as he is also shown constantly like that in artworks or renders more than anything else. This appearance of him is after an event known as a tragedy to the Rosfield family, which is considered the big moment where a time skip inside the story of the game happens, and all the events where you get to play as Clive with his younger looks act apparently as a flashback in a technical way, a moment that happened in the past, while the main present story is in the other time frame, which is a similar way to the previous two examples, and a good point of comparison to what we can expect. Of course, he's not the only character in the game, and one of his childhood friends is the Shiva-dominant Jill, so we have her growing up too. And from my understanding, she will join you to fight in the party in present time, once she has the Shiva powers. The other key character of both timeframes is Joshua, the Phoenix dominant and Clive's younger brother, but suspiciously enough, the bits of him shown after the tragic day look oddly similar, so we have to look forward to what's up with that. Apparently, it's not the only time skip inside the game, so there's more mysteries to solve, in less than a month, which is pretty exciting. With all this amazing news about the first new Final Fantasy mainline games in years, it's the perfect time to get into this lovely franchise, as it provides a wide range of ideas and gameplay changes to keep it fresh and make every experience unique, making it that there's probably a specific favorite game that resonates more or less with each person. Thank you very much for watching, enjoy some Final Fantasy and I'll see you later. Love you.